All right, y'all, welcome in to Salt City Hoops live postcast. I'm Mark Pereira, and it's been a couple weeks. But the internet tells me it's been a couple weeks, but I feel like it's been a couple months. It's hard to get psyched up to be doing live postcast when the Jazz are bad, but it's also important to be like get the chops up and make sure that we're engaging the community on everything going on. So I also haven't had time to write as much as I wanted to, so I felt like, well, do I have some thoughts that are worth just spewing out into the ether? Maybe I'll get a clip out of this. Maybe we'll have something to chat about at the end of the day. So, um, Jazz lose to the Spurs 118, 111. Nobody cares, right? um, Interesting game plan against Wembanyama. The Jazz actually win the second, third, and fourth quarters. If we want to take a look at the box score real quick before we move completely on from what happened today, but they get completely waxed, pantsed off in the first quarter, 29-15, 15 points in the first quarter. And the Jazz proceed to win every quarter after that to a 7-point loss. I mean that's usually the prescription for a close game, but the Jazz never even came close in this one because of a horrible first quarter. It's incredible that you let Trey Jones shoot 2 field goal attempts, have 9 assists, and he's a +4. Jazz starters, I actually thought that they got off to a horrible start, but they actually played well throughout the rest of the game. 40 minutes for Keontae George, I thought he was fine. It was just the bench was pretty miserable. We had a weird lineup for a moment where we had Kyra Lewis, Taylor Horton, Tucker, Micah Potter, Omer Yurtseven, and Luka Samanic all on the floor at the same time. And I imagine that lineup was the starters really got off to a horrible start. And he was like, I'm just going to throw 5 other players out there. But that didn't exactly help matters, right? So it's kind of hard to get psyched up about a whole lot. Lucas Samanic go 0 field goal attempts. He had one. He got fouled once, and he missed both the free throws. I'm glad he's on the team. So, like, the Jazz aren't trying to win, and we get that. And I think it was admirable that we got 42 minutes out of Lowry Markkinen tonight. So, like, the whole, like, Jazz are – this is going to lead into, I think, our first topic. The whole Jazz are trying to lose aspect. I think we've completely lost the thread on this, right? And there are actually very few coaches in the NBA who are aligned with their front office. I think it's very difficult to find that. The front office can, take clubs out of the bag, but the coach is going to play who they have. I do think Will Hardy is one of the few coaches that does seem a little bit aligned with what the front office is trying to do as far as, Taylor Hendricks probably isn't ready to play yet, or at least this many minutes in favor of maybe some of the guys who have more experience. Especially early, I think today's rotation, I think he deserved a spot on the floor. But John Collins only getting 23 minutes in favor of Taylor Hendricks getting 33. Keontae George getting 40 minutes, right? And Taylor Horton Tucker getting 4. These are – I'm not suggesting Taylor Horton Tucker is better than Keontae George, but you get the sense that Will Hardy is all in on the youth movement as well, which is not always an easy thing for a coach. So you get this pseudo-taking team, and I think the Jazz have completely written off they're absolutely way worse than they were in the beginning of the season. Their net rating actually isn't that much different as far as ranking in the standings. Now, there's some anchoring to that as far as, like, the worst teams in the league are getting even worse, and, like, the Jazz are not quite Wizards level ineptitude as far as who they're able to put on the floor. But if this team was truly tanking, Markkanen's not seeing the floor today. John Collins is not seeing the floor today. Colin Sexton's not playing 38 minutes. So I think we have to understand that losing Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio doesn't mean fucking shit. This team was just bad. This team, without a competent Walker Kessler, has no real theory of the case and has a lot of holes. And I will entertain the thought that Kelly Olynyk, Ochai Agbaji, and Simone Fontecchio were providing competent, like, dike filling moments at as your sixth, eighth, and ninth most important players. And the guys behind them are Taylor Hendricks, Bryce Sensabaugh. You get Luka Samanic, and not in more Chris Dunn minutes, perhaps. Those are not quality players behind him. But I think we're starting to realize that, like, John Collins isn't all that good and is not carrying a team. Lauri Markkanen, as great as he is, a top 20, 25 player, top 30 player, being charitable here, not carrying you to wins. Colin Sexton's having a marvelous season. I think he's making a stamp that he's a relevant rotation player for the future, especially at the contract that he's on for the next couple of years. I think that's really important. But Keontae George is a rookie point guard. He had 5 turnovers today. And he was in the rotation before, right? So maybe he's not playing 40 minutes like he did tonight, but his 20, 25, 30 minutes in the rotation, not because of a random youth movement, because he was simply the 7th best player we had at the moment, right? Like, he was better than Ochai Agbaji and probably equal to Simone Fontecchio as far as impact on the game. And he was playing 20, 25 minutes, especially with the dearth of his combination of passing and shooting, right? So Chris Dunn might have better passing and defense, but he can't shoot it all, and sometimes the shooting stress is really what you need. Taylor Horton Tucker provides a different set of skills entirely at the point guard position, and it's completely fucking up the rest of the offense and defense that you can't really play him. So you're playing Keontae George over Chris Dunn and Taylor Horton Tucker for very good reason. It's just not conducive to winning basketball. This team is set up without a Mike Conley type was always going to be a 30-win team. I need to look up right now what I said preseason about how many wins this team was going to have. It's actually my last article. I said under 35.5 wins, and I said firmly. I wrote, I'm going to share this. Let's go ahead and share this. The cracks in the foundation that could be delightfully ignored last year are way too obvious to hide this year en route to a possible playoff appearance. The passing skill is horrible, which is compounded by the fact that Utah's best player, Lauri Markkanen, is largely a dependent threat who requires great advantages to be laid out for him to make the most of his efficient scoring ability. And I go on to talk about the issues of the various rotation players, right? A lot of people were optimistic about the Jazz being successful this year, and I just didn't see it, right? I was optimistic last year when everybody else was pessimistic, right? Like, you need to have real starting quality players to really succeed in the league, not have a bunch of rotation players that are kind of good at filling some random holes, right? So if your answer is Lauri Markkanen, and we thought it was going to be Walker Kessler, so Lauri Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and a bunch of garbage, or a bunch of lukewarm toast that are fine, that's fine. Like, Kelly Olynyk is fine. John Collins is fine. All these players are fine. That doesn't win you NBA games. And I thought that the theory of the case before the season of, like, well, the Jazz are just going to go 10 deep on any given night, and opponents who aren't able to do that when their roster tops out at 7, 8 guys, they won't be able to keep up with the Jazz. A lot of these teams with only 7 or 8 guys had 7 or 8 really good basketball players, and their 9th or 10th or 11th guys were like fringe rotation guys who had a specific NBA skill, perhaps, right? And if the Jazz were rolling out from the beginning of the season only 1.5 starting quality NBA players, that was going to present a problem. The 1.5 being Lowry, Markkanen, and Walker Kessler. Walker Kessler is turning out to be a paper tiger of sorts, right? All year he's professed a positive plus minus when he's on the floor, and he's been quality. We also have seen the problems with a lot of his performance, and there's a reason he's only playing 20 minutes, 22 minutes tonight, 1 of 3 from the field. Look listless out there against Wembanyama. Very bizarre. Like, he will put up the counting stats of the 2 blocks and the 6 rebounds in the 22 minutes. He's not a force out there like he had at some of his biggest moments last year. I don't know if FIBA ruined him. I have no idea if he's just exhausted at this point in the season. But we go into the season saying Walker Kessler's had a finished second in Rookie of the Year voting last year. He's going to be a starting quality player. John Collins is a total mystery. I'll even give you credit even calling John Collins another starting level player. But the rest of the roster, we weren't looking as starting quality players. Colin Sexton, we did not go into the season thinking he was going to be a starting quality player. He is now. Good for him. And even today, Keontae George and his quality and his progression and where he's going, he is a net negative on the floor. He's a rookie point guard. That's fine. He will be amazing. I love him. It's going to go great. Simone Fontecchio wasn't even in the rotation at the beginning of the year. Taylor Horton-Tucker's fucking started at point guard to start the year, guys. And he wasn't a starting quality player. He's not even in the rotation on a team that's not even trying to fucking win right now. So we go into the season, I think, with completely moonshot expectations for this team to win 42 games. On paper, this team going into the season without a Mike Conley and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. NAW was not a good basketball player last year. Really turned it on since he's been playing with the Wolves. They've really unlocked him. He's become a really quality rotation piece, especially defensively this year. Good for him. He was bad for the Jazz last year. But let's say we get quality Nickeil Alexander-Walker for the Jazz this year. We put him in the rotation instead of a net negative player. We put Mike Conley in the rotation instead of a net negative player. Jordan Clarkson, who we've always kind of thought as a bench player, finally goes back to a reserve role this year. But we've always known Jordan Clarkson as a lot of empty calories performance. He's really valuable as far as what he's providing to a contending team, is like soaking up critical possessions, taking the shots nobody wants to. And he did have that fast twitch athleticism that can really give you pretty much neutral performance at on a given night. And there were going to be some nights he was going to take a whole lot of shit off the table, but there were going to be some nights he was going to put stuff on the table. So going into the season at his age, you're thinking, well, he's okay. Basically as good as Kelly Olynyk type of guy as far as what he can put on or off the table. So it's a bunch of this bullshit around Lowry, Markkanen, and Walker Kessler, and then all of a sudden it doesn't take very much at all for that entire theory to fall the fuck apart. Jordan Clarkson, worst season of his career, including his rookie year. He might already, suddenly, immediately after an extension, be completely fucking washed. Gone forever. We'll see. Walker Kessler, who knows what's wrong with him, goes from being the next Rudy Gobert replacement to looking like an okay bench setter for 12 years, bouncing around to 7 different teams. Mason Plumlee. We'll see with him. John Collins, horribly net negative player for the entire season. A worse season than Jordan Clarkson. Turning it on as of late. Nice to see him kind of figure out some things. Not surprised to see a guy like John Collins maybe needing a moment to figure out his new teammates, new coaching, like all that kind of thing. He's a unique basketball player to kind of fit some stuff around and play calls and play style around. And we'll see. And Markkanen and Kessler learning to play with him is going to be a new thing. But he was bad. He has been bad. Colin Sexton has been a nice performance in the last 25 games or so. Bad player start the season. Chris Dunn, kind of like Jordan Clarkson, puts a lot of shit on the table some nights, A lot of nights he's not good. So you end up with Lowry Markkinen and a whole bunch of gray. You're telling me that's a 42 win team? Get the fuck out of here. It's now becoming increasingly apparent to me. This is why I wanted to do this show. I got 0.1 people listening. I don't care. I like the idea of the optimist case going into the season. John Collins figures it out. Walker Kessler takes a step. Jordan Clarkson does not decline. Colin Sexton takes a little bit of a ball handling step. Maybe we get a surprise performance out of one of the rookies. I think we were all expecting Taylor Hendricks to be that guy to provide some important wing minutes. But instead it ends up being Keontae George, which actually really helped this team with some ball handling at some times where we really needed it. The problem is with that ball handling role that he was able to provide, he is taking a lot of stuff off of it with bad shooting, turnover, stuff that he's still trying to learn. The role we thought Taylor Hendricks was going to fill ends up being filled by Simone Fontecchio, which, God bless him, he's going to make $14 million a year in the offseason due to his performance this year. But bulky 28-year-old okay defender sharpshooter whose sharpshooting is B minus level, right? Like, you're not terrified of Simone Fontecchio. You're scared of him. Like, he's a really good three-point shooter, but he was horrible last year and he had a bad start to the season. He started to kind of fill in those minutes when we didn't have anybody else who just could fill the I'm 6'7" and can guard other guys who are 6'7" size role. And he performed. And all of a sudden we're able to snipe a draft pick for the trade of him. So the optimist case has Kelly Olynyk filling that role. John Collins having a great season. Walker Kessler. We've talked about all these things. The optimist case says this could be a 43, 44 win team if they all, and with Will Hardy as a coach, right? Making smart moves and really integrating John Collins seamlessly, getting some stuff out of the rookies that we didn't expect. I have no optimism for Taylor Horton-Tucker, and I will not entertain any arguments to the contrary on that part. But the optimist case, you have to be a real strong optimist to carve together some sort of 42, 43 win team for this team to get to the 7 seed or the 8 seed in the play-in tournament and a very, very overwhelmingly likely first round exit. So if that's the optimist case, the medium case is some sort of, shitty 36 win season. The over under for the season, by the way, 35.5. And so it doesn't take that much of a pessimist to say, guys, I don't know. This is like a 33-win team, 32-win team. And I don't see exactly how they're getting 35 to 40 wins. Doesn't really take much. And you're thinking, well, Mark, 32 wins, that's not a very large amount of wins. They would have to be really bad to be 32 wins. They've won 29 games, and we think they're fucking terrible. They have a dog shit start to the year with Taylor Horton-Tucker starting at point guard, and the Walker Kessler issues haven't been solved, and John Collins can't be integrated. Jordan Clarkson plays like shit. The rookies and Colin Sexton aren't playing nearly as well as they're playing now. So they start horribly to start the season. They figure some stuff out in the middle of the year. Taylor Horton-Tucker mercifully gets fucking benched for once. And yes, we still have Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio playing important 20 minutes per game, as they are. But that's all they're playing. It's just a little bit of 20 minutes a game. I lost the thread. I lost my thread on my very. I thought I had a very good tangent going. I read the YouTube chat and I saw comments from LD and I was like, I gotta pause to read these. So the Jazz have a dog shit start to the year. They finally start to write some things out, and then after trading these 20-minute per game guys, we think, this team is completely fucking given up on the season. Lowry Markkinen has a very real injury, right? Like this quad contusion that is jokingly being very much milked at this point, but at the time he actually had the injury, it was a real injury. So he gets benched, and we lose a bunch of games, deservedly so. And everyone's thinking, like, well, this team this is way worse than last year. Guys, they're on pace to win the same amount of games. Their net rating is basically the same. This team that we lovingly adored for overperforming and being wonderful last year is actually the same fucking team this year. And we don't have a Mike Conley, and we don't have Nickeil Alexander-Walker. We don't have, Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt are this year's Simone Fontecchio and Kelly Olynyk. Average guys. Average guys. That, by the way, we were able to steal first-round picks for? Are you kidding me? So, it requires a 10,000-foot view to understand that this team is not actually some moribund, tanking, super awful franchise, and that it's actually not that much different from last year at all. The vibes are different, and that's where I will say I agree with anyone who says this team feels worse. You feel how you feel. Your internal feelings are always justified based on how you feel. Now you can receive new information and new facts that changes how your gut feels about something. We're going to talk about John Stockton in a moment. That I think is relevant for that. Fucking John Stockton. Those feelings are accurate because it's how you feel. You feel like this team is playing worse. Guess what? You're probably right. This team is less enjoyable to watch. Guess what? You're probably right. The stats don't bear that out. But you're allowed to feel like the vibes are worse on this one. Like the new feeling that we had last year of just like, fuck it, we're playing with house money. Let's see what we got. Lowry Markkanen, all-star, most improved player. This is pretty cool to watch. Who saw this coming? And so this year, you naturally are looking for like, well, I just hope they're a little better than last year. And when they weren't on the floor before the trade deadline, on the floor, they were not better than they were last year. The team made a correct decision to say, we are actually not getting better. We are not progressing in a way that makes sense for this. Let's try to build up more assets so that we can actually improve next year. And everyone said, oh, they're taking this big, massive fucking step back. The big step back was trading Mike Conley last year. If you're going to blame anything about the vibes about this year, you have to go all the way back to trading Mike Conley. And if you really, and I would not judge anyone for saying we're going to take it all the way back to trading Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. That's when the vibe started to sink. I think a lot of people also were getting the bad vibes of the last 2 years of the Mitchell Gobert era with Quinn Snyder, and said, we reluctantly agree with you that it was time for Donovan Mitchell to go. He wasn't going to extend. He did extend. He was going to ask for a trade. He was one of those stars that just kind of felt like, he's not going to stick around Utah for a very long time, is he? Especially with Quinn Snyder gone. Would have liked to see him with someone like Will Hardy maybe re-engage his spirit for Utah, but I've talked about that 1,000 times. But the fan base was kind of on board with that, to say, all right, we're going to lose Mitchell and Gobert. Let's start over. We don't trade Mike Conley immediately, in part because the prices that were being offered for Mike Conley were dog shit. So we said, you know what? Probably just better around keeping him and see if he can establish some sort of relationship with the young players that we're getting in these trades, like the Agbaji, Markkanen, Walker Kessler, and saying, like, will Mike Conley give us 2 or 3 more wins than we want to in the Victor Wembanyama draft? Probably. But it's worth keeping him around because we're just being offered second-round picks or garbage or heavily protected first-round picks for him, whereas his value to us as a franchise is a little bit more than that, even if it costs us wins. So if you have consternation about not taking enough for Wembanyama, you have to say, like, well, you should have traded Mike Conley and Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt and anyone where they weren't bolted down, like Kelly Olynyk, right, from the Bogdanovich trade. You should. Instead of trading Bogdanovich for Kelly Olynyk, who they intended on flipping anyways, which, by the way, that ended up working, right? We traded Bogdanovich for Olynyk and ended up trading Olynyk for a first-round pick. Amazing. That's good value. You have to say you want to trade these players for pennies on the dollar. By trading them for pennies on the dollar, you ensure more losses. Instead, last year we end up winning more games than we expect because Lowry Marketing comes out of nowhere. He's amazing. Walker Kessler is Walker Kessler. And Mike Conley and guys like Kelly Olynyk are kind of juicing, or it's not so much Kelly Olynyk, but it's definitely a lot of Mike Conley juicing up what this team can do, winning a lot more games than we anticipated. Awesome. The vibes you're feeling right now in 2024 started from when we traded Conley. Because this team isn't any worse than they were last year as a whole. But you're going into the season being like, well, we'll build on what we could do last year. Everyone just has this magic, like, video game, like, boop, they improve. And this is not how reality works. I also feel shittier this year. I want to make that clear. For whatever reason, I'm enjoying the team less than I was last year. The stats don't bear that out. But it's like we're not stupid either. We have eyes. We're watching a team that doesn't give a shit as much as they did last year. And teams that don't give a shit still tend to win a few basketball games. Now the Jazz are what, like 1-9, 1-10 in their last 10 games? So the Jazz aren't winning either. But there was a stretch in the middle of the season where they were winning games they really shouldn't. And I don't think that was really indicative of the overall quality of this team. I don't think if they didn't trade Olynyk and Fontecchio that they'd be markedly better than they are now. They might be have 4 or 5 more wins. I think that even that's too high. Would they have beat the Spurs today? Probably. There's probably a few games that they have. Let's take a look at their schedule, right? Since the trade deadline. They've had a brutal schedule, right? Forgot about that postponed Warriors game. All right, so they're 1 in 1,000 since the trade deadline. Trade deadline was what? February 8th. So from here, that's right, the Phoenix game that we were inexplicably close in. So there's a lot of home game. Like we should have beat Charlotte. We should have won the home game versus Atlanta, and we did. We were never going to win the Denver and Boston games. Should have won that Chicago game. But road games against quality opponents, Atlanta's not super quality, but like, I mean, I remember this Atlanta road game, right? 27-point loss. We're not winning that game. Kelly Olynyk was not winning us that game, guys. We played like shit. That was it. The guys who were playing played like shit. This is when Markkanen went out, by the way. Markkanen didn't play this game. Because he was actually hurt. This wasn't a tinking hurt. He was actually hurt. So he doesn't play any of this shit. He's not, and we're not winning a game where we don't have Lowry Markkanen with or without Kelly Olynyk and Simone Fontecchio. We're losing all these games. I think we probably could have won one in the. This is when Markkanen could have played, right? So we're 29-37 going into the Minnesota games. Could have won one of them. I mentioned we should have won the Charlotte game. So I'm clocking that this team would have had, if we had Simone Fontecchio and Kelly Olynyk, and by extension, maybe had Lowry Markkanen for a game that he gutted out while managing his quad injury. This team might be 32-41 right now. I'm sorry, man. That team still sucks. Kelly Olynyk and company are not helping this team. Laird in the chat, love having you on YouTube, man. I haven't been on live for a little while because I wanted to. I just had some thoughts that I haven't been able to write down, and I just wanted to kind of get out and spout off because I got nobody to talk to about this shit. Few things mentioned by LD in the chat. He says Will thought he could treat Walker like his little brother and broke him. And we're seeing weird vibes out of Walker Kessler, and you got to trust the folks who are kind of around the team, who are at the games, like yourself, who are watching his vibes. I've never seen a player who has this juvenile. This is a little strong of a word, but this juvenile of a thought and an attitude towards playing professional basketball. I think we see when we think of immaturity, I think we think of like the classic NBA maturity of just not playing within the team and kind of shooting his own shots and not being a great uh, doing the little things kind of player. And that's like the opposite of Walker. Walker is very willing to do the little things and put his body out there and be a great defensive center. But for a player of his, how much he works and how much obvious success he's already had, his confidence is bizarrely juvenile. Like someone who has real self-esteem issues for somebody who is amazing at his craft already. Like he's not a rookie going through struggles and personal strife. Like he has a great environment around him, and what he does is immediately translating to success. Like he can already you look at the projection, it's like, dude, you're gonna make 400 million dollars in your career already, just based on who you are. A preposterous amount of millions of dollars. And it does call into question about the coaching style and what has happened so far. Laird, you mentioned that the youth of the assistant coaches as well, the inexperience of Hardy's assistant coaches as well. Not having Coach Jensen around for the second season, that could be a big reason. Coach Jensen was on the team for the first year, notably the big man coach for Rudy Gobert and Derek Favors and all the other big men we've had. Very, very quality coach. And we don't have Jensen this year to kind of be that different sounding board. There has to be a change to the approach with Walker Kessler, because you have a blue chip out of unexpectedly, right? Like when you're trading Rudy Gobert and you're getting all those draft picks, and you kind of just say like, and we'll take your first round draft pick this year too, and they throw in Walker Kessler, and he turns into the second place rookie of the year finisher. You have to then treat him as the amazing asset as he is. And if you completely wax away his value by miscoaching him, you're doing a great disservice as a coach, as a franchise. And I think last year as a rookie, it's kind of being like, all right, Walker, let's see what you got. Go do what you can and go ahead and make mistakes. And then towards the end of the year, when it was, and going into the season, when it was immediately obvious that Walker Kessler already knew how to play professional basketball, Laird, to your point, Coach Hardy is extremely hard on him. And it's perhaps too much too soon. Maybe this is just like, hey man, still just a sophomore player who, instead of playing in summer league for the second year in a row, like he played a little bit, but like instead of playing like consistent summer league, we're sending him to the fucking FIBA World Cup, right? Which he deserved to go, and sure enough, like he didn't play at all in the FIBA World Cup, even though the USA team has their deficiencies, right, and rebounding and defense. Like they could have used somebody like Walker Kessler. I don't think it's exclusively a Utah Jazz coaching thing. You also have to wonder what the hell happened at the FIBA coaching level that ruined his confidence, where they had obvious holes where he could have provided solutions and he didn't get to play. Like something happened there, and we're never going to hear the story, and you always want to. LD saying Jensen gone is massive. His calmness, confidence, and maturity is severely missed on the bench. There is not a single calming force on the bench. Everyone defaults to Will as if he were Greg Popovich. That's an extremely interesting observation from somebody who watches that bench, 41 games at home. Because the only thing we see on TV is the cuts to Will Hardy, right? And I, I I'm very adamant that you do learn a lot when you sit close to a bench day in and day out. And I make it to whenever I go to the Nuggets games, I usually sit close. If they're non Jazz games, I usually sit about 8 or 9 rows up, but still like visible to the bench, and I can see how each coaching staff kind of interacts with each other, and how the players all interact. And for Jazz games, I try to sit like right next to the bench so I could hear everything. And it's a it is a very top down approach with Will Hardy, but part of it I'm wondering, like last year the games that I saw, it's like, all right, Will Hardy's learning how to be a head coach, right? And um kind of figuring out, all right, what is my voice on the court? What do I care about? And I think you're seeing kind of specifically that he's during game action, he doesn't seem like a very collaborative guy. During practices, I think that's a different story. And I think as someone of his upbringing, I think he understands like the value of that. But perhaps on the court in the middle of a game, he's perhaps a little um top heavy, despite his brilliance and despite what he is able to do with players. And I think he says all the right things in press conferences as well, as like um what he expects out of his players. And uh even though he is hard on players in general, I think he it also enjoys the collaborative aspect of the. I always go back to the "it's okay to have a cheeseburger once in a while" comment of just like it's okay to be normal, because as much as these NBA players are freaks of nature and wonderful athletes, they also have to be treated like human beings. And I do wonder that this whole Walker Kessler discussion. This whole Walker Kessler discussion goes back to, are we going to have a rebirth of kind of like that relationship? Are we going to have a rebirth of who Walker Kessler is going to next year? Because part of the utility of a head coach um, is having a diversity of thought with different players, right? Um, I've always wondered why exactly coaches would have a shorter fuse with some players than others. Why did Quinn Snyder ruin Dante Exum, for example? Right? And some of it's just you have to have the right match of player performance and errors that they make, combined with what the coach is trying to get out of his team or trying to get out of a specific situation, which is how you end up with such a reliance on guys like Shelvin Mack, fucking Trent Forrest, because like they were doing the minimum things to keep the what makes the stars going. Like, what does Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert need? Well, Trent Forrest is doing that, and other players weren't. Shelvin Mack is doing that, but Dante Exum wasn't. So it's kind of like, all right, what are we looking for as far as a match there? And as a first-time head coach, Will Hardy has got to realize that when it comes to his blue chip talent, at least, he has to have a greater understanding of how to maximize those talents, and that might require coaching guys differently. It might require putting guys in better positions to succeed and giving a different message, right? I think Will Hardy has said the right thing about you cannot have some sort of perfectly egalitarian film review where everyone gets to just like call out the same mistakes for each people equally, right? So if one guy makes a mistake and you call it out in the film room, right? And then a week later, a different guy makes the same mistake and you don't call it out. Like the players can't be butthurt about that. It's not like, well, you complained about that guy last week. It's like there's going to be a push and pull to these things. We're going to notice some things one week. We're going to notice different things another week. We're all trying to coach everybody up the same. But you do have to have an understanding of the personalities you have. It's one of the great difficulties of being an NBA head coach. And as young as Will Hardy is, there is going to be a maturity discrepancy between, okay, now you're a head coach of an NBA franchise, and now you got guys who are 20, 21 years old playing NBA basketball. Like there's that 15 years is a chasm of maturity difference. I'm 33 right now. I was 20 years old when I went to law school. I was a fucking moron at 20. Right? Like I had the academic credentials to belong in a fancy law school with people who were 27, 20 years old and had actually done something with their lives. But I wasn't on their level, maturity speaking. And now at 33, like I'm like, all right, yeah, like I know what that's like. So there is, as young as Will Hardy is, he's way more Mike Conley than he is um at the level of some of these other players, right? Younger than Mike Conley, right? So um he's got to recognize the Walker Kessler issue. Going back to the other comment you mentioned, LD, is losing Simone and Kelly killed the vibes more than losing Mike did. The vibes are infinitely worse. And this is where I am trying to agree with everybody and disagree with everybody at the same time, which is an impossible task. And I'm walking a very, very, very fine line that probably doesn't exist. I'm not saying that the vibes don't feel worse. I see it. I feel it. I'm watching the same games everybody else is. It doesn't feel good right now watching the Jazz. People's body language sucks shit. Even the rookies who are just kind of excited to be out, who should be excited to be out there trying new things, they got weird ass body language and effort issues. There are real effort issues, and not mental mistakes. We're talking effort issues on this team that just make for, like, last year when this team was total dog shit at the end of the year. You were seeing real try hard from Lucas Hominic and Damian Jones and Juan Toscano Anderson, Chris Dunn coming out of nowhere being a revelation enough that we gave him a real contract, and Lucas Hominic as well. That are like, hey, yeah, these are guys worth keeping around. Like the try hard is very evident on that team. Know that we didn't, the young guys on that team, Ochai Abaji and Walker Kessler, were also playing down the stretch. And they also had the good give a shit level and effort and were positive players. Walker more so than Ochai, obviously. And this year, your young guys, Bryce Sensabaugh and Taylor Hendricks and Keontae George, are much more of projects than those guys are. Like Ochai Abaji was a 4-year college player who had a very discernible skill set of shoot threes and provide some athletic defense. Walker Kessler, we've talked about him ad nauseum. All of Taylor Hendricks, Keontae George, and Bryce Sensabaugh are way more of moldable projects, very Danny Ainge style draft picks of going for upside than Ochai Abaji and Walker Kessler are, which are, those guys are more like just NBA ready, plug them and play. They should be ready to play. And they were. Keontae George has been a delight to watch this year, and he's been much more surprising as a real point guard with good passing skill. But he's like, ball handlers naturally require a lot of repetition and learning the NBA to become actual positive players. And he's been a net negative player this year. Taylor Hendricks, total project. That's self-explanatory as to why we drafted him and where he's at in his career. And Bryce Sensabaugh, unlike a late round pick like Walker Kessler, you're not drafting Bryce Sensabaugh to be like, well, he's going to play 20 minutes a night or 15 minutes a night doing his job. It's like, no, that this is a college scoring type who fell in the draft due to injury issues, but he was very much like a unathletic is too strong of a word, but he's a scoring type that didn't rely on athleticism to get buckets. So he's got to learn the NBA game to then translate those buckets in the NBA. So he is a project rather than, well, he's 7 foot, knows how to block shots. At worst, we'll play in 12 minutes a game or at all. Like if he needs to come in every other game to play defense, like that's fine. No, Bryce Sensabaugh, if you're put him in the game, it's because, well, we ran out of players. And so you end up with, Sensabaugh had a very rough game first half today, I think, and turned it on in the second half. All this to say that I completely agree that the vibes from in those rookies, I feel like there's some like effort issues at times with these rookies, especially Keontae on defense. And part of that's learning the NBA. It's very exhausting to be an offensive load like Keontae and then turn around and give that effort defensively. I think that can be difficult. Taylor Hendricks just learning the game in general. I think the game is still moving way too fast for him to really contribute. The vibes are worse. I agree. My only point is that on paper, this team is actually not performing worse than they did last year. And I think the people who are thinking that we would have won 7, 8, 9 more games than we have if we hadn't traded Kelly and Simone are completely full of shit. Like it just does not bear out. I think based on my review of the schedule, I think we could have won 2 or 3 more games if we still had them. And those 2 or 3 more games are not affecting the Jazz's place in the standings. And in the summer, we were going to not resign Kelly Olynyk. We were going to not resign Simone Fontecchio. So now we got a couple first round draft picks for them instead. That's amazing. So both things can be true. Both things are true. The vibes are worse. The team is not performing worse. The vibes have much more of a long-term unknown effect. We'll see. I think injecting new blood into this team over the offseason, Jordan Clarkson likely won't be back. Lauri Markkanen's going to get paid. We're definitely going to add at least 4 or 5 new guys who are going to be rotation players, perhaps. A couple rookies. There's going to be a new enthusiasm for performance next year that is going to depend on Walker Kessler improving and John Collins improving. A lot of fans are saying, like, next year you got to make the playoffs. I'm already warning you. This team ain't making the playoffs next year. I'm sorry, guys. They're just not. And I understand the frustration. Like, if you're not going to make the playoffs, can you at least get the first overall pick for once? Right? And I think being Washington Wizards bad for a few years, that is draining on a franchise. Just preposterously draining. I am stunned that Kyle Kuzma re-signed. I have no idea what his whole shtick is. But him re-signing in Washington instead of taking like $3 million less to go play somewhere that doesn't suck shit will never cease to amaze me. But hey, he's there. But other than him, it's like that team is miserable. And they're really, really bad. So I think there is actually a surprising difference between being the worst team in the league and being the 8th or 9th worst team in the league for a couple years. I don't see a lot of optimism for next year. I wouldn't have any. But every offseason brings new hope. We'll see who the rookies we bring in are. We'll see if there's any big splash trades made. Like we have all these draft picks. Maybe we'll make a trade. So we'll see. Laird, I love having you in the chat. I really appreciate your comments you've brought. I really appreciate you mentioned, like you're saying, JT isn't Washington said he doesn't care about this team. He needs something to play for. I only dispute that because I think if there are a lot of shots that I feel like he had made in the past that he just hasn't been making this year. And that could be indicative of a lot of things. It could be effort based. It could be give a shit level. His fast twitch athleticism that gives him, like we always kind of think of him always a slow meandering paint player. He gets defenders off balance with feints and quick twitch movements with the basketball, and it really throws defenders off balance. And I've always wondered, like, is he tired from the extended play with the Philippines? Is it his give a shit level, as you're intimating? Or is he washed? I tend to be in the middle. I think that he's obviously getting older and tired, and I think you're going to lose some of the athleticism there. Shooting is a little bit random too, but a guy like him has other things he cares about as well. And to get up to the 110% effort level that playing NBA basketball provides, you really got to have a wider thing to care for. And perhaps he's not someone who jives perfectly with Will Hardy or Lauri Markkanen or what have you. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to string out the season and come back next year. We'll see. I've had this news article on the screen for a while. I've been online for a little while. I think I'll save this for the next postcast. Oh, we got a few people. I'm gonna go on it. So, long story short, I need to get that ran off about the Jazz just to say I think everybody is absolutely correct that the vibes of this team are not correct. And it feels worse this year than it does last year. I agree with you. If you look at the numbers, the Jazz are actually not performing worse than last year. And I leave it to everybody individually to draw their own conclusion from that. The conclusion I'm drawing is I was right that this team wasn't going to be good this year. And I think that's kind of my vibe to it. And just hoping that this season, now that you have Lowry Markkinen, whose extension is about to hit, it's going to be renegotiating an extension. So he's going to be expensive next year. Now, the hard part of the rebuild is this offseason. Your team is expensive. It better be good because Jordan Clarkson's still expensive. John Collins is preposterously expensive. You still got Walker Kessler on a cheap deal, and now Lowry Markkinen is going to be expensive. Before you start running into salary cap issues, let alone fucking luxury tax issues, you better start getting 45, 50 win teams. What is the plan to do that this year? My quick fix, you get rid of John Collins because I think that there is a role for him on a playoff team for sure. I like the projection of what John Collins could be. This team does not have $25 million of salary to waste on seeing if John Collins is going to figure it out at this point in the rebuild. Instead, try to find a team, just like the Atlanta Hawks did when they traded John Collins to Utah. Try to find a team where you're not exactly losing an asset to put him in a place where he will succeed. And instead, use your bevy of draft picks that you have and maybe some of your young players like Walker Kessler to build real other stars or starting quality players around Lowry Markkinen and Will Hardy is how I would do this. That is kind of my conclusion on what I'm doing this offseason. But we have a lot of offseason discussion to have. Massive whiplash. We're going to talk about John Stockton for a minute. I haven't thought about what I want to approach here, but this article got released 2 nights ago, so most people saw it yesterday morning. A rare interview, long form interview with John Stockton and his history and kind of where he's at on his anti-vax movement. I think before we get started on anything I say, I am extremely biased. I don't give a shit who you are. I am very trusting of scientific professionals. I know several in my professional and personal career. I know the people who study this stuff. When it comes to doing my own research, I tend to study people who have PhDs in the stuff that I know personally from college and law school and whatever. Politically, I'm borderline socialist. So, yeah, there's going to be a little bias here, but I try to look at these interviews as like, there's a lot that I actually took away that was positive about like I'm trying to rationalize the whole like, okay, so I'm some, commie liberal jazz fan. What am I supposed to feel about John Stockton these days? And I believe very strongly in separating the art from the artist. I think you really have to have strong convictions in that because the art we enjoy gives us so much joy and different feelings of belief that if you start focusing on the artist to like marry up with your same belief system, you're going to be disappointed 100% of the time. Because that's that's what your friends and family are for, right? And even you shouldn't expect that from your friends and family either. And hopefully amongst your friends and family, you have a healthy diversity of discourse. That's where I'm coming from with this whole John Stockton thing. So there were 2 points of the article that really stuck out to me. I'm going to start off with the positive. And that was, so Buer is the quack chiropractor who worked for the Jazz for a long time. I'm trying to get to the story about the Houston shot. Yeah, so this whole segment here where Charles Barkley was trying to injure John Stockton in play. And John Stockton, tough as fucking nails, man. He fights through it, and it's John Stockton. Like, he misses no games in his entire career except for, we'll get into his longevity in a moment. And the chiropractor, his name is Bueller here. Regardless of like whatever diagnosis you have, it's like, and according to Bueller, it's like Stockton was at the team hotel for breakfast, and Stockton was hunched over, visibly in pain. Bueller diagnosed it as a disc injury, which would require weeks to heal. And Stockton, as hurt as he was, gutted it out to provide like the greatest playoff performance of John Stockton's career in that Houston series. That's when John Stockton hit the shot, right, against Houston. That's a legendary story. That's a perfect story that really epitomizes the joy of being a John Stockton fan. And then what was over 19 seasons in the NBA, he missed 22 games, and 18 of those were all at the same time. So he missed 4 games over 18 seasons, or 19 seasons. He missed 4 games from wear and tear stuff, right? So he has an acute knee injury, needs knee surgery. That's one thing. But over normal wear and tear, sprained ankles, bruises, twisted knees, quad contusions. Dude misses 4 games. And just a delightful basketball player to watch whose quiet demeanor, fans tend to revere the players with a quieter demeanor a little bit, because we are all, even if we come from different white collar, blue collar backgrounds, like right now I'm a corporate lawyer. I come from a very blue collar family, so I kind of understand both paths of life a little bit. We're still not professional athlete rich, 99.9% of us. So when we see a guy who's that important to a professional basketball team, making the millions that he is, or being as important as he is, going to the Olympics, playing alongside Michael Jordan and Charles Barkley and whatever. And Karl Malone is also this to a lesser extent, just because, Malone had a little bit more flamboyance in his play a little bit, but in general, he was also kind of soft-spoken, do his job type of person. Fans, and I don't think this is, a lot of people describe this as unique to Utah, unless you're in like a market like Los Angeles. I think fans, even in fans like, especially in like New York City, like they really revere the workman like attitude of certain athletes who come in and say like, this isn't meant to be a show for me. This is meant to be a show for insert basketball team X, right? The Knicks right now have a variety of those types of players. Jalen Brunson isn't showboaty. Josh Hart isn't showboaty. This team has a noticeably better vibe around them when Julius Randle isn't playing, right? And so you get into this interview where we're talking about John Stockton, quietly exiting, back doors to not talk to the media, hiding in corners of the airport to not be noticed. I think we all see a lot of ourselves in that, and just being like, all right, man, you're one of us. And I still think that is something to be respected. I don't want to say admired, because as this entire point of the article is getting to, and you can get to the headline, finding John Stockton. The original headline for this article was, John Stockton doesn't want you to find him. Let's see here. Yeah. The original headline for this was John Stockton wants you to leave him alone. The entire vibe of this article is saying like, all right, so he shuns the public spotlight, but he understands what it means to be famous, and now he's finding his voice as like somebody who's important and can throw his weight around certain discussions. All right, he's picked the wrong discussion, and I'm going to point to the other thing that really stands out in this article. So this whole anti-vax bullshit, it's bullshit. I don't think anybody has to get too much into that. If you believe otherwise, fuck off, I guess. But if you, especially if you believe otherwise, I just want, this is how these conversations go. In this segment of the article, we need to really pay attention to this. In January 2022, Stockton alleges over 100 professional athletes have been killed by the COVID-19 vaccines. Killed. By December of 2022, 10 months later, Stockton asserts that over 300 professional athletes have died due to the vaccine. And now, in March of 2024, it is well over 1,000 professional athletes that have died due to the COVID vaccine. It's preposterous on its face, but the worst part is what immediately follows by very good reporting and interview skills. And it's shockingly rare to see a reporter and an interviewer do this nowadays, of just being like, I'm trying to get your source for this information. Can we get your source on record so that we can, let's tell the public, like, oh, you have these facts, let's fucking give it to them. And Stockton says, well, you're just making it up. Well, we've got a list, he says. We've got a list. Oh, all right. Well, so Stockton's says, well, we can refute people telling me I'm making it up because I got a list I can show them. All right, yeah. John Stockton, we think you're full of shit. You're making it up. Show us the list. When I, the interviewer, asked where I could find the list, he explained that someone had sent it to him and he hadn't looked at it in some time. Interviewer followed up, asking, where could I find it? He shrugged his shoulders. I don't know what to tell you. What is the point? What is the point of that? Yes, if you think it's so important, John Stockton, that we start having more freedom of bodily autonomy and medical autonomy or what the fuck have you, and that we should have more open-minded to say fuck off to doctors and medical professionals who know what they're talking about and pursue our own holistic pseudoscience methods. If you want us to encourage that freedom and be an arbiter for medical autonomy in this country, and you want to take this position and be a public voice on this, then give the public the information they need that you think is being hidden. Instead, oh, I don't know what to tell you. And this is always how this shit goes, man. As soon, it's not even like 6 or 7 layers. As soon as you carve back one layer of any sort of anti-vax proponent nonsense, one layer, you find the most obvious conflict of interest or the most obvious lack of educational background on the matter. Like, you find obvious lack of real evidence. It's someone who conducted a study, and then even like basic statisticians who aren't experts in the specific field of study can say like, well, those methods are widely debunked as horrible ways to conduct statistical studies in general. And you just have to peel back one layer and it just gets refuted. And I think that's what's most annoying about this is like, I'm not trying to treat him like some RFK Jr. like, okay, this guy is just widely peddling the stuff. It's that John Stockton is this professed, private, quiet guy who's apparently always had these quiet, secret medical opinions about things. Like, fine, sure, fuck off forever, stop bothering us. But now he's taking this public position, and he's putting our entire fandom of being a Jazz fan in question, and it really sucks because he's taking exceedingly questionable positions that could hurt other people. And when pressed about it, if John Stockton just said, "Look, man, I don't personally trust it. I read somewhere that over 1,000 athletes have been killed by it, and I want to live my own private life, and I don't want to abide by COVID vaccine mandates and masking and whatever. I just don't believe in it." I could just do a jerk off motion and say, like, well, separate the art from the artist. He's an idiot. Move on. Instead, he's being this public face about it. And he's rubbing it in our faces and trying to be an evangelist for a horrifying movement. That's the problem. There are so many professional athletes who are just horrible people. Separate the art from the artist. And I continue to do so with Stockton. I revere his longevity. I enjoy the memories he gave me as a Jazz fan growing up. I love watching Stockton highlights still. I love the stories about how much of just a dirty asshole he was on the court. Right? One of those guys that you just hate as an opposing fan, but if he's on your team, you love. But when it comes to separating the art from the artist, sometimes you just do want the artist to shut the fuck up so that you can continue to appreciate the art after the artist is done performing. So you can look back on the art and appreciate it. Karl Malone is a different story. We'll talk about that another time. I'm just deep. This article is, I would recommend it to everybody. It's an insight into who John Stockton is these days, what he cares about, and I think offers a very honest look back onto his playing career that I don't think has been done a lot, like with the interview with the chiropractor and talk about him. And it should be said also that this chiropractor, his wife was arrested for being part of the January 6 riots. So that's notable. 6 months in prison, I think it was. Punishable by up to 6 months in prison. She'll walk. She won't serve a day in prison. So that's all I got today. Talked a lot about the current state of the Jazz. Laird, I'm so glad you jumped in, asked a couple questions. Always love it when a question kind of drives the story forward a little bit. I might clip some of the that John Stockton discussion. But for now, this has been Mark Pereira. Catch you on the next Salt City Hoops Live. Till next time.